real-world React concepts. The two we'll deal with today. First off, context. We got to have this one. This is almost a must. I really wish they would make this part of Compass because it's that important. The context API is something really no React developer would dream of not using in their app. It's that important, and we'll talk about why. It's really critical. Like use state and context. Those are the big things about React. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about some hooks and drilling, what this is, and we'll talk about the context API, okay, and some providers that we write. And the goal, of course, is shared state. That's the goal, how to share state between components without using props. Really? Is that even possible? How do you share state between components without using props? And yes, it's possible. Okay, and we'll talk about this concept of interface versus implementation. Yes, prop drilling. Yes, no one likes drilling, okay? It is really annoying. And I think in the Photo Labs exercise, I think they made you do, there's a lot of it. Like passing props just all the way down and down, and they change names sometimes. They keep on going. So yeah, we try to avoid prop drilling. We added that to the Compass exercise, not just to be mean, although I think that was part of it, but to give you experience with props. But nobody would write an app that way, like ever. That just wouldn't happen. Okay, they'd use instead context API to share state. That's kind of part one of our talk today. Part two is even more fun. We're going to deploy a React app to a cloud service. Now, I know we've done this as part of Compass where we went to, I think it was Netlify and someplace else. I forgot what it was. But that was two different services. One to hold the HTML or the static site, and one to host the Express app. Well, that's kind of weird. Why would I have to have two sites? Couldn't I just deploy it all on one cloud service? And the answer is yes, we can. And database too, if you want, all on one service. So we'll talk about that. We'll make ourselves a React client, and we'll talk about how to build it. Did you? We talked already about npm build or run build, how to build a React app? Yes? No? Not sure? We'll talk about that. How we build an app. Now, we did talk a bit about Vite, didn't we? We had a conversation a little while ago. Talk about Vite, because that's what we're going to use as our React. We're going to use Vite, and it's pronounced Vite. Even though, depending on your French, it could be pronounced Vite, but since it's a proper name, and the people who named it, they called it Vite, which is the French way of, or the France way of pronouncing fast or quick. So it is Vite. And we'll use Vite to build our our React app with. And we have an Express server running our API. So it's going to be a React app and an API. And we will not be using create React app versus create React app. And I believe I did have a talk with you a while ago, a few weeks back, at least, and we talked about what's happening with Create React App. Anybody remember that? What's happening with this? What's happening with Create React App? It's dead. Okay, it's gone. It's, yes, deprecated or depreciated also works. But I guess it's both. It's both depreciated and it is deprecated, which means it's gone, which means do not use it anymore. We'll use Vite instead. And we'll talk about how to build our Vite app, or it's a React app just built with Vite, and have our Express server. And then we'll talk about the package.json files, because this is what controls everything when you install, build, run. We know that by now. It controls everything. How the app gets installed and built and how you start it. Well, it turns out this is a critical file when deploying to a cloud service. And we'll do the install, build, deploy, run cycle, and we'll publish to a cloud service, probably to Render. This one's pretty good. I've used Render before. It's not a bad service. It used to be Heroku. But they got bought out by another company, and they started charging for everything. So I'm too cheap. I don't want to pay money for this. So everyone stopped using them. And Render is actually pretty good. They're actually a pretty good system. We'll use them. And we'll talk about a DevOps cycle. You've heard this term DevOps before? It's like the hottest thing. DevOps, DevOps, DevOps. We want DevOps engineers. Well, it's people who control the life cycle of an application from edit, push, build, deploy, and run. And of course, we could also say test inside there. We won't be doing that part of DevOps. It's just an extra step. It'll just be push and build. We'll assume it's running. So, but technically we'd be testing. Okay. So that's the DevOps cycle. You'd edit, developer edits, you push, then maybe that triggers a test someplace. And then a build triggers a deploy, and it runs and it becomes live. So from the developer's desk to the internet, unattended or with a single click. And that's our goal today, to be able to handle this stuff using a DevOps ish kind of cycle. All right. So let's talk about the React Context API, because this one is really cool stuff. Okay. Now, there are generally 2 hooks, 3 that we learned so far, isn't there? We learned use, state, and we learned use effect. And I think 1 or 2 more as well. But let's talk about these 2. Now, use state, use effect, these are what are called your primary hooks. We can think of these as the A-listers. Let's assume we're at the Academy Awards and it's the red carpet. Well, if it was Academy Award red carpet for React hooks, this would be Dwayne Johnson and Taylor Swift, the ones that people want to see. There he is. Oh man, Dwayne, I love you. Yes. Okay. And Taylor Swift. Yes. Okay. They're the A-listers. They get all the attention. They are what we call the primary hooks. Let's take a look at some descriptions of hooks, and they usually end up being the first ones people talk about. Let's take a look here. Let's take a look. Primer hooks. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. So they're always top of the list. Use state, use effect. They're always there as our first 2 hooks. Okay. There are other hooks we talk about. Use memo, use callback, use ref, use layout, lots of other hooks. These are kind of the B-listers. Who's a B-lister? I'm trying to think of one. Like Tom Cruise, he's kind of getting on the B. He's kind of slipping, you know. I could do that another Top Gun. Don't need any more Top Guns. And I'm kind of Mission Impossible out. Although, you know, Tom Cruise movies, there's some good ones. Oblivion, good one, right? And Edge of Tomorrow, great one too. So yeah, some good shows too. But they're B-listers. All these others, okay. But turns out there are 3 A-listers. Look at the list. There's always 3. Use context is the 3rd primary hook. Let's find another one. I think I have another site that talks about that too. Talks about basic hooks. Basic meaning the ones you should always use. Take a look. Hook state. Hooks effect. Here comes basic hook. Basic hooks. There. Okay. Basic hooks are those 3. Those are your A-listers. What's that? Add. Okay. Use state, use effect, use context. The 3 A-listers. And then the rest. Now, use reducer. This is kind of a wannabe A-lister. It's very useful. It was really popular back in the day when we had complex state. So we did have use reducer. Reducer, which was used for complex state. back in the day when people made complex state, which, by the way, you shouldn't do anymore, right? In fact, if you look at React's guidelines, they say don't use complex state. They literally come out and say it, use flat state. So they say use flat state. In other words, do not have a state object. That's old Jurassic React back in the days of class components. We know now that class components had this big state object. Everybody was wrong, actually wrong. Yeah, kind of. Not really wrong. We taught things a certain way for a certain reason. For instance, we taught you prop drilling to give you calisthenics of props. Okay, but yeah, you wouldn't do that in a real app. But now we're really good at it. And we did some complex state objects to do complex state updates using spread operator and use reducer. Okay, but these aren't so common. We know where state comes from. Remember, class components. So people that use state objects are probably people that are used to using class components, and they just carried that forward into their modern day life, which React says you shouldn't do. Okay, so this is kind of like the Tom Cruise. I mean, the A/B lister kind of wants to be up here with the A-listers, but use context is definitely on the red carpet. That's all the cameras want to see. And then use reducer, and then all the rest. The Gilligan's Island of books, the rest. Okay. So today we're going to talk about use context. It is a very cool hook. And when I first discovered it, I couldn't imagine not using it. That day changed my life. It was one of those moments like, oh, wow, I am using this now forever. Okay, and I do have everything. When I've shared state, I use context now because it's so much easier. And well, what makes it so easy? Let's look at the problem here. What I have here is I have an app. It looks like this. Let's look at my app here. There it is. I've got a little app. It has two pages, if you will, a login page and another page. It shows some information. It's two pages. And it's a dumb log. It doesn't do anything. I can give it anything I want. So there's my page. So there's my info page and my logout page. There. That's it. That's my whole app. That's all there is. Each one of them has a counter at the bottom because we just love counters. There. It has a counter there, and I can pick any login. It doesn't matter. And I can log in there and have another counter here. Okay. So each one of those two counters has its own state. As you see, this is now 12. If I log out, it gets reset because, of course, the counter is being destroyed because I'm conditionally rendering both these two pages, aren't I? So in one case, if I'm logged in, I've got some state. I think it's called auth or something. And it'll only render this, which means all of this disappears. Or if I am logged in, then that auth is true. I render this page and there's no login. So the counter gets destroyed. But as you can see, there's no shared state. They're different states. I want to have shared state. This is what I want to have. And I have shared state between siblings. Now, shared state between parent and child is easy, right? What do? Well, just props. If I had some state here, I could share it with my direct children. And there is still nothing wrong with having direct state sharing from parent to child, because that is the way it's supposed to go. Okay, but I've got siblings here, and they're kind of like not even brother and sister. They're like niece or cousins. They're cousins. Is that cousins? I guess that's a cousins. They're cousins, which means they don't even share a common parent. They share a common grandparent, but that's it. So what I want to do is take my state, and we know it has to be pushed up to the closest common ancestor. Kind of a timely topic. We talked about this in vampires, remember? Closest common ancestor, and it's Halloween, so look at that. We would push our state up to the closest common ancestor. And then we'd push it back down again to each of our components. We did this in a bunch of exercises in React as well. And this, as we know, has a name. This is called prop drilling, isn't it? This is prop drilling, where you take some state And instead of just to a child, it gets pushed through another component, at least one, sometimes a lot more, and finally ends up at its final destination. That's prop drilling. Login page and info page, they couldn't care less about this counter. They don't use it, but the counter component below them does. So that's what prop drilling is, where a component is forced to take some props only because some child somewhere down the line, it could be 5, 10, 100 levels down, might need that prop. As you can see, this could become a problem really, really fast, couldn't it? I mean, if I had a couple layers, maybe 10, it's not unusual to have 10, 20 layers of components in a large or even medium-sized app. That's not uncommon. You can imagine having to make sure that all the components in the tree remembered that state for counter. If they don't, things break. So that's a lot of extra code in all these components. But not only that, take a look at my counter. Let's look at my counter component. Got my counter right there. There's my state inside my counter, right? What else have I got? I've also got some functions that change state: increment, decrement, and clear. So those also need to get passed down all the way from parent to child. So not only have I got state, I've got some counter state functions which also need to stick with that state. And the rule is generally keep your state and your functions that change state together. They should always be together. They shouldn't be separate. They should be together as a unit. I think we have this use application data hook or something. Same thing. We kept our state and our functions all together. So what it means is I have to take my functions and also drill those down. Now it's becoming a big problem. I've got state and 3 other functions being passed. That's 4 things passed down who knows how many levels to each of these components. And this is just a counter. It's just a little counter. You can imagine in more complex apps, this can really become an issue. Now, yeah, we can put it on an object, but then we have complex state, and that's a problem. So it causes us a lot of grief. Prop drilling is generally considered the bane of our existence as React developers. We try to get away from that. But I've done it here. I've actually have one of my branches of my app. Let's change branches here. Let's there. Let's change branches back. I've got a prop drilling branch there. Okay, and I've done this. I've changed my code, so now my count and these functions are now here in this app component. And as you can see, I'm now passing all this stuff to all my child components. And if I look at, for instance, the login component, let's go control click, there it is. It's also passing all these 3 things down to counter, but it never uses them anywhere here. It just simply gets them just to pass them along. In other words, I have this going on. Does it work? Let's take a look. +++++, 6, log in. Yeah, it works. I have shared state. +++, go to 9. Yeah, so I do have shared state, but it's a pretty high cost because I've had to drill all of these props down through components, and could get quite complex with more and more components. So there has to be a better way, doesn't there? Turns out there is. Oops, there. There is what's called a context. Looks like this. There. So here's a picture of what a context looks like. Oh, one more time. There we go. There. This is a diagram or a visualization of what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to create a context. And within that context, we will share the counter and the counter functions. So any component anywhere in that context will have instant access to that state. That's our goal. And it could be a child or a grandchild or 100 or 1,000 levels down, doesn't matter. Any component that is in this context will have access to this state regardless of where they are. They could be children, they could be siblings, cousins, it doesn't matter. They'll all have access to my context values or my context state. So how do I make this happen? Okay. Well, the easiest way to start is look at my state. There's the state I want to share. And right now it's in my counter, isn't it? So this is the stuff right there that I want to share. Counter and these three interface functions that talk to counter. Right. So what I'll do first, I'm going to make myself a custom hook because they're easy and I can take this logic and push it into a custom hook first. That's usually a great step. Okay. Let's take a look. So let's make ourselves a hook and I'll call it use counter. There we go. Make a function and I'll call it use counter. Okay. Now this is a custom hook, which I can take my logic from my counter, just copy and paste, much like we did in use application data. Let's take that logic and just push it into our helper function, because that's all a React custom hook is. It's just a helper function. I'll import my use state. Let's go control space, and I'll have that auto import feature. Okay. So now I have use counter. I'm going to export that because I need that, because I always forget to export my functions. Okay. There's my custom hook. And the question is, so context is a bit like declaring a custom scope? Kinda. It's a little different than that. Become clear in a second. It's more like we enclose all of our components in a context, and any enclosed component will have access. It'll become clear a little later. So I've got my custom hook use counter. Of course, it doesn't return anything. I need to return some stuff, don't I? So I'm going to return, and I'll return, I guess, an object, because that's usually pretty convenient. Whenever I have more than one thing to return, an object's not a bad choice. So I'll return counter, I'll return increment, decrement, and clear. So now all these functions are available to anybody who wants to use this custom hook. Okay, let's try and use it. So go to my counter. Now easy, I just simply replace all of this with the custom hook, don't I? So I can take my object, since it's already here, go to my counter, and instead delete that, and I'll say const that equals my use counter. Just like that. There. Same thing, but all I've done is taken all that code, and now it sits inside here. How's it looking? Well, the counter's still working. There we go. Log in. But it didn't solve my problem. It's just a custom hook. So the state is still inside the counter. It's just buried inside a hook now. But multiple instances of the same custom hook don't share state. There's still a separate state. So I haven't solved anything, but I've kind of moved all this logic into a custom hook called use counter. And now it becomes pretty easy to convert this into what's called a context provider. You may have heard this term provider in React in your reading sometimes. Well, we're going to make a provider. In fact, they're so important, you will almost always see a directory for them. Providers. Oops, and they're not under hooks, by the way. They're under source. There. Providers. You'll commonly see hooks, and you'll see providers. And I'm going to copy this file because providers look an awful lot like custom hooks, like very, very similar. So let's take this, we'll copy our use counter and put it into here. We're going to rename it. We're going to call it instead our counter provider.js. Okay, so there's our new file, counter provider. Now, anyone notice anything interesting about the file name that I chose? What stands out looking at this file name counter provider? Anything interesting? It's got a capital C, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly, capital C. What does that imply? What does capital C imply on my counter provider? It probably is a class component. A component, and you'd be correct. A provider is a component. So I'm going to make my counter provider a component. Easy enough. I'll just change the name. There, whoops. Counter provider. There. Come on. Counter provider. There we go. I've changed the name and I'll export that. Okay. Now, simply change the name of a function doesn't make it a component, does it? No, it's just giving a capital C. It doesn't make it a component. A component is a very specific thing, isn't it? It is a function that returns what? A component is a function that returns, who can tell me? This function returns an object, so clearly not a component. Yes, it's JSX, exactly. A function that returns JSX. That is the definition of a React component. A function returns JSX. If anyone asks that in an interview, that'd be a great answer, because I ask it all the time in interviews. So let's change it. We can't return this. I'm going to make just make a value, because we'll need this later. Let's give it assign it to a value for now. We'll put a pin in this one for now. I'm going to make a return, put some round braces to balance it out, and I can just do this for now. There. Now this is a component. Doesn't do anything, but it's a component. Counter provider, and I can now use this, which means I can call or use counter provider with pointy brackets, can't I? I could use it like in my app. I can call counter provider like this, can't I? It'll work. There's no errors. Well, that was a previous error, but yeah, see? Works. Use state's not defined, that's fine. So this works. I can now call my counter provider function or component with pointy braces. It is now, yes, in fact, a component. And what we want to have is this. This provider, this is what provides the context. Let's go back to a little diagram here. There's our context. So this is the context. And the context, it looks like it's wrapping or enclosing the components that we want to provide the context to. So keep that in mind. This is we're wrapping or we're enclosing these components. Well, this is XML or HTML JSX, right? How do we enclose things? Well, we look at app. Here's a div, right? There's the beginning open tag. There's the end tag. So this div is enclosing all of these things. We could say these things are wrapped by the div, or they are the children of the div. So what we want to do is have our counter provider wrap any component that we want to have access to, which is these two here, our login and our info. So login info. So we're going to wrap those two things. Let's take our provider there and we'll self-close it now. We haven't done this yet in Compass, I know. And counter provider. And now it's going to be, whoops, end that right there. There. There's our provider and is now enclosing all of our app except for the title, which doesn't care. So now our provider is enclosing these components. We've really done this so far, okay? Okay. I may have noticed something funny going on here. Anyone notice what happened to my app? It's kind of gone. Where's my app? My app is there, but where's the rest of my stuff? It's all gone. What happened? I don't really have any serious errors. I've got like a not used state, but that's just a warning, right? But there's no errors in my code. What happened to my app? It's all gone. Where's my stuff? Let's take a look. There it is. There's my product, but there's my stuff there. But it's not showing. Nothing is showing. It's all gone. What on earth could have happened? Let's go to my provider. My provider. Look at that. Well, maybe if I put let's try something in here. We'll say, hello, provider. Take a look. Oh, hello, provider. Look at that. Looks like now everything has to be inside here. Now, we haven't done this a lot or at all in Compass. where we had a component that had an open and a close tag, and it had content. A component or a React component can also have content. Usually we just take this, don't we, and put it inside here. Like we just put it right there, don't we? But we can also do it this way. And turns out this way is much more flexible. So we can have our provider contain arbitrary content, any content, not just this, but really anything. How do we do that in React? How do I get these things, which aren't rendering, to render here? Instead of hello provider, I want to render this stuff. Now, I don't want to copy and paste because I don't have all this extra stuff, right? So I need to render arbitrary content. Let's take a look. So this provider is wrapping, or it is the parent element of these two. You can say this is the content of provider, or we could call them the children of the counter provider. So is there anything in React that allows us, give me a hint there, to render the children of us, of our provider? And of course there is. It's props.children. I can say props.children. It's a special prop that always exists. And I'll give you the content of this component. And my stuff is back. There, that's all I had to add. Props.children. And it allows this component to contain arbitrary content. It doesn't need to know what it's wrapping. It's just the children. And it is, of course, anything inside it. Yes, it's very cool. It's a very cool feature of React. It's very common. We don't do this a lot in our, I think at all, in our photo labs. I think we haven't got that. But it's very common, more common than you think. So now it's working. Great. So now I've got this thing wrapped. There, by the way, I'm almost done. Okay. That was like one line of code. Well, I guess a couple lines of code. I added that. I made a capital C there, and I returned some JSX the props of children. It's not a lot. So, but it's not quite a provider yet. There's two things I have to add. I have to add a context to this. I have to create a context because this provider provides a context. Well, I haven't got anything called context. I need to create a context. Let's go ahead and make one. Make a variable, and I'll call it const. I'll call it counter context. There. Equals something. Well, I need to create a context. Well, turns out there's a function in React called create context. Let's make one. Anybody can make one. Create context. I've got one. And now I have a context. So that's one line of code added to our previously a custom hook. Now I have to somehow connect this context with my data here, okay? And the way it works is this. So this is a little odd, but it's the same every time for every provider you'll ever write in your life, okay? Looks like this. We'll take our counter context. There. And inside that object, there is a component called provider. There. That's all we need. All we have to do is like that. There. And now we have now created a context that we now provide to these children. This never changes. This code here, this line stays the same. This stays the same. This might change. Okay. What about this value thing? We're providing a context, but what are we providing in the context? We want to provide what? We want to provide the state and these counter functions, don't we? So let's go to our provider and do that. So it turns out there's an attribute you can pass to this provider component called value. And who wants to guess what it's equal to? You probably guessed it. It's this thing right there. Provide this in the context. There, we're done. This is now a fully functional context provider. Not a lot different from a custom hook. We simply created a context. We did our state stuff, which is normal stuff. And we did this funky thing with the provider dot thing from the context, which never changes. There. So now we have a provider which is providing this context. So how do I use this context? I've got one, that's great. How do I use the context? Let's go to our counter. There. Now, we'll just comment this one. And instead, we're going to use our context instead. So we'll take this line because it looks almost the same. And we're going to use our context. And who wants to guess what the name of the hook is that will allow us to use our context? Oh, yeah, it's use context. Of course, it's got a giveaway. Use context. And what context? Well, it is the counter provider there, which I import from my provider. Okay. So import your provider. Oh, hold on. It's my context. Double check. There. One more time. My context. There. Counter context. I didn't export it. Yes. Export. There. If you can't find it on the autocomplete, then export. So now my counter, I can see my counter context. There it is. I import my counter context and I use it. There. That's it. That's all there is. 2 lines of code. Get the context, import it rather, and use it. And now all these things are part of the, or what's in the context. Let's take a look. And I probably have a use state. Take a look. Oh, use context. I probably should also import use context. Control space and use context. There we go. Okay. Very cool. Does it work? Let's take a look. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a 4. Let's admin. It's a 4. I now have shared state. In other words, I have this where I have my context and my counter now has no props. It's just pulling these things out of the thin air, isn't it? And any component can do this. You want to add or access this state, just add this line of code to any component you want, and it will have instant access or direct access to the state provided by the context provider. So it's really, really a powerful tool we use in React to allow for shared state. Use context. Okay. We can actually make this a bit simpler though. Okay, because this is 2 lines of code. And I think, well, 2 lines of code is fun, but what would be better than 2 lines of code? 1 line of code, right? It'd be even better to having 1 line of code, because this is, I gotta remember this, like this and this. Let's make our context even simpler. Well, what I can do in my context provider is I can take advantage of this. Why don't I simply make myself export, I'll call it default, oh, national default, we'll call it const, use counter here. We'll make a use counter custom hook inside our provider. This function. Okay. What does that do for me? What it allows me to now do is, well, same thing. Just do this. I'll take that line of code and I'll use the context inside my custom hook. So I'll take my provider now, there. And I'm just going to return this thing. I'm just going to return the whole object. So let's go return this. What does that buy us? Well, now we don't have to do the import. We simply can use our use counter hook and our code becomes a single line. So I don't need this anymore. Don't need my provider here anymore. And instead, I'm going to now call the other use counter. Not this one from my custom hooks, but this use counter, like that. There. Isn't going to work. Let's take a look and double check. Oh, of course, use context is not defined on my provider. Yes, use context right there. Control and okay, imported. And there we go. Okay. Plus, 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 refresh, plus, plus, plus. That works. And it does work. And the question is, so it's like a wrapper object. Why does it even need connect to the children instead of more of a helper class? Well, first off, we don't use classes in React. We use functions generally, but use context is made to follow this pattern where we do wrap, right? We're wrapping our components in this component. This is a component because in JSX, the only thing that can wrap things is another component. A function can't wrap things like this. It can't have children like a component can. And we would try to keep things in our JSX. So we have a component that wraps these, and that means these child components have access to the context that they are wrapped in. Okay. All right. By the way, what happens if we forget to wrap something? What if I did this and instead did not wrap my login? That means my login is trying to do a use, my login's counter. So the counter here is trying to do a use context, but it's not wrapped. What happens if a component does that? If it tries to do a use context, but it's not wrapped? Let's take a look. And we get some really unhelpful message. Let's take a look. I'm going to log in. Let me log out here. There. Okay. Yeah, we get this really odd message. Object ... is undefined. Doesn't make any sense. It's really not very helpful. Okay. It does say it's on line 7, which kind of tells us it's here, which means it's probably happening inside our use context. You cannot call a use context unless you're wrapped. That's the rule. It's got to be wrapped. So of course our login is not wrapped, and we get that error. So if you see this odd error, object ... is undefined, which doesn't mean a thing, it just means you probably didn't wrap something and you tried to do a use context in it. And as I mentioned, we almost always turn our provider into a custom hook, which means we can call it with a single line of code, just like this. So now my counter is available. It's shared state. Let's just try this. Let's do one more thing with this. Now we have this use counter. It's available everywhere. Why don't we, just for fun, let's take our, maybe this page here, this component. We'll just add a counter to it. How long will that take? Okay. Now, normally I'd have to set it some props, use the props, pass the props through. But I want this info page, which is right here. I want to put my counter right here. And make another line here. I'm going to say, whoops, put it here. Info. Let's put it right here. There. Count. Okay, I want to put the count right there. Right now it's going to say 0. So I want that to be count. So what do? Well, to use a context, since it's already built in, the plumbing's already done, it becomes really simple. I simply go const count. It's in an object, so count equals use counter. Counter done. And now, again, oops, hold on. Oh, and of course, I'm also going to put my count there. Okay. Oh, hold on. Use counter. Let me make sure the right one. Where's my counter? Oh, counter. Did I call it counter? You're right. It's called counter. And counter. Okay, there we go. There we go. It's showing. Okay, so now I've got my counter right there. One line of code. And I gave myself access to some shared state. That's easy, right? But it's everywhere. And maybe your nav bar to show the current user. You'd probably want to keep your current user in your shared state. Who's logged in right now? So I'll have that as my shared state. In fact, let's try that. Right now, I think I've got my app.js. I do. I've got my current user here. Okay, and I've got some functions that operate on that state. Why don't we take this and turn this into a provider? So now every component everywhere has access to the current user. That'd be useful. I mean, a counter is kind of fun, but this is useful. So here's my state. I've got this auth thing to grab all the state. Let's take our provider. In fact, let's just copy this one because they're so similar to each other. We'll call this auth provider for authentication. This is our auth provider right there. Okay, so let's take that and we'll call this the auth context. Just rename a couple things. This all goes. Don't need that value for now. Don't need these. There. I'll call this use auth. Just renaming all these things. And we'll call a provider our auth provider. There. So now we have essentially a shell of a provider. Okay. And there. Okay. So it's an empty provider. This stuff never changed, right? Nothing changes here. I'll rename the context. We'll call this my auth context. There. Okay. So this is essentially a shell of a context provider. You've got your create context, you've got your little hook to make things easy, you've got your component, and you've got this funny dot provider stuff we don't touch. So now I'm going to take my stuff goes here. So really, your code goes here, or your state code, let's say. What do you want to share? Well, I want to share all the login stuff. Let's go to my app. Take all this login stuff now. All of that, we'll take that and put it inside our auth provider. There, it's all there. Okay. And I want to share all of it. So I'll just set my value to my auth, my user, my login, and my logout. There. Okay. And oh, my context changes to auth context. There we go. There we go. How am I doing here? Auth context. I think I'm doing pretty good. That was it. That was just change the names and copy some stuff in, and I think I'm done. It was pretty fast. That's boilerplate apart from the name. That's boilerplate apart from the name. That just has a different name. And this is boilerplate apart from the name. This is, and that object simply contains whatever it is you want to share. Let's try and use it now. So I want to have my login page, for instance, and my info page use my current auth, and also my app. So my app, that's the main candidate. It uses this auth flag, doesn't it? It's a true or a false. If auth is false, it shows the login page. If auth is true, it shows this page, and login, the world's dumbest login, it just says, yeah, you're good. Doesn't do any checking. It sets auth to true and sets auth to false. A lot like the maybe the light and dark thing we did in Compass, just setting the style. It's exactly the same thing. It just sets one true and one false, and it displays either page. Okay. Well, I want this to now come out of my provider. So why don't I instead take all this stuff here, and instead I want to go const my provider data. So we'll take all the stuff here, there, my data, and equals my use auth. There we go. And what do I get? Let's take a look. I get, oh, object ... is undefined. I've seen that before, haven't I? What does that tell me? I'm calling my use auth, which calls my use context, but I'm not wrapped. App is not wrapped, is it? Now, these are wrapped, but we're not wrapping anything with our auth provider. Why do I do that? Like, app's the top. I can't really wrap app, can I? Because, I mean, can I do this? Can I go auth provider here? I don't think so. And somehow do this, that. That's kind of what I want. But of course, I can't do that. It's not JavaScript. It's going to crash, right? But it's kind of what I want. I want to wrap my app in my provider, but I can't because it's the top element. So that's not going to work. Well, I'm kind of stuck. What can I do? How can I wrap my app in my provider when app is the top level element in my XML tree? How can I solve that? Well, let's think. Is app indeed the top level element of our React app? Let's take a look at our code here. And no, it's not. We also have index.js. There. Index.js finds the root and injects app in it. So really this is our top is index, which means I can put stuff inside here. This is now XML, isn't it? I can do this. So I can go put my auth provider in here. Oops, provider. There. Like this. And I can wrap app right here. Just like that. And now app is wrapped because index is the top level. Okay, so now let's take a look at how am I doing? Oh, okay, well, I've got a couple undefined but not used. That's okay, but no errors. Let's take a look. What happens now? It's working. Yeah, it's now getting all this stuff from the provider or the hook that provides the provider. It's working. And now, well, how about these two? I don't need these anymore. Why don't I simply not pass this and have these two components also get their stuff from here? Let's grab this line. This is kind of handy. Let's go to my login page right there. And we have props.login and props.auth. So my login can now, so this, let's grab, I'll go here. There. And I think all we need, this is login. That's all we need for this one. So we'll just go this. We just need the login function there. And now, instead of props.login, we're just going to call login like that. And now props is unused, so we can delete our props completely. Is this even going to work? Let's take a look. Give it a try. Oh, and I probably wanted to import my use auth. There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's try and log in. It works. Very cool. One more time. Let's go to our last component, our info page. Let's make this work. Let's grab the same thing. There. Use auth. Okay. We don't need log out. We don't need the user, so we'd get rid of these two. There. So now we don't need these two anymore. We'll import that so we don't forget this time. There. It can't be that easy. Let's take a look. Okay, log in. Well, there it is. So no props needed, which means my app, I don't need any props at all to these two components. There and there. Go. And now I have a prop-free app. There is no props anywhere in this app. That's awesome. Look at that. And I still have shared state, and I still have my auth all working. Wow. So we can make a prop-free app. Now, you wouldn't normally do this in a big app, but things like the authentication or the user, that would certainly be a great candidate for a provider. And now, remember, this is other stuff. I may have something else. I may have another, maybe a use effect that maybe loads the current user, does a fetch the current user. All my stuff that deals with auth has to stay inside here. And then I do a set user, I guess, wouldn't I? Etc. So anything that does a set state belongs together. That's an important point. And that's my next, I think I want to cover really quickly before the break. We're going to talk about this concept of interface versus implementation. Okay. A very, very important concept. I can't stress this enough. So what I have here, I have my state there, and I have some functions that operate on that state. And you might say, well, Gary, why don't you just expose set user and let the children take care of setting user? Why'd you make these functions log in, log out? Just it's one less thing to pass, right? There. But what this is a detail. This is what's called an implementation detail of how users are implemented. And you should never expose that to the outside world. That should be dealt with what are called interface functions. Login, logout. It does all the gory details and does a set user, but does other stuff. Maybe it does a post, maybe an Axios or a fetch.post, and goes and gets some stuff. And maybe this is also as a post, right? Or other stuff. But these are details that no one else should know about, only this file. So we would never pass any set state function down to our children or share it with the outside world. It should stay in here, and it should never bleed out of our state. For example, we have used application data, don't we? All the functions that change state should stay in there, and we should never pass any of them outside anywhere. Okay, we pass interface functions. For example, anybody remember Photo Labs? That one? We had a couple things. Example here. We probably had some favorites. Favorites. Spelt the American way, I guess. Okay. It was an array. Okay. And we want to pass down to our children two things. We want to pass their children some ability to toggle a favorite on and off. And is this favorite there? So make a function. I'd call it is favorite. It takes an ID, and that function will simply return return the favorites. Does it includes the ID there? And there is my interface function. I wouldn't pass favorites down to my children because now I'm exposing how I manage favorites, which means my children need to have knowledge they shouldn't have. For example, what if I decide to recode my stuff and now instead of this becomes a fetch from HTTP something : / and that tells me if this thing's favorited. Well, now I got to recode all these child components that I've used my favorites array. They have to recode all their stuff, and they have to do a fetch, which is real pain. So this is an interface function. Another interface function very useful for Photo Labs would be toggle favorite and would take an ID. And this would do one of two things. It would check if is favorite, the ID. It would probably remove it. Just remove, right? The ID from the array. And then return like that. Okay, and otherwise it would add the favorite to the array there. And I would pass this function down to my children. So now my children have no idea how favorites have been implemented. You don't need to know. That's a secret that is kept here. All the implementation details are here. We just pass these interface functions down to our children. They call isFavorite and toggle favorites. And that's all we call. All right. Let's take a short break. Okay. See everyone in 10 minutes. Oh, no explosion? Oh, just a happy Halloween. I was hoping for an exploding pumpkin. Okay, so part two, what we want to do now is we want to build a React app and an Express app and deploy that to a cloud service. That's our goal. Okay. And I've actually got one built here. I've got another project here. I called it React Final for a lack of a better name. It's kind of like my final project, but it's not a great final project, but hey, it works, right? So it's called my React Final. You could think of this as maybe the shell of a final project. In fact, and I think what I'll do is I'll publish this. So you can get it from GitHub, and you can use this if you want for the shell for your final project. Okay. It contains two mini projects. If you click on the left here, I've got the client and I've got the server. Let's take a look here. Yeah, client and server. And oh yeah, no modules, RM minus RF. That's probably F. Don't need that one. There. Okay. Client and server. Okay. And there they are. Now my client is a React app. I think it's a Vite app. It is. I can see this Vite in here. And it's got this main.jsx as opposed to the index. Okay. So who's familiar with Vite? Has anybody been familiar with Vite before? Yes? No? We talked about that before in a lecture? Let's take a look. Okay, so let's go to our Google and we'll talk about create React app. Create React app. Oh, deprecated. What does that say? Okay, so it goes on to say, well, goodbye, create React app. Okay. And in the past was a popular choice. However, React's new documentation released March of 2023 no longer recommends CRA as the go-to solution for creating React applications. Huh. Wow, let's take a look at this. What does this say? Let's go to the dev community. Goodbye, create React app. Huh. Okay. So it's no longer. Create React App is finally gone. It is gone. It is history. You can still use it, but it's incredibly inefficient. So I would not create any new React app using CRA anymore. And very few do now. There are much better ways. Okay. It was big, it's bulky, it has lots of old stuff. It's just really big. Okay. And they talk about Vite. This is pretty cool, using Vite as the builder for your apps. Okay. They're 1/5 the size of a Create React app. Very cool. Let's give it a try. Let's actually go ahead and make one. Since we're here, let's make ourselves a Vite app. Because what does Vite mean? Anybody up on their French? What does Vite mean? It means fast or quick, right? It means fast. Exactly. It means fast. That's what Vite means. And yes, it is fast. Let's demonstrate that. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to make a up one here. I've got a bunch of stuff in here. Yeah, I'll just make one here. Let me make a new project. Now, how do we do that? It tells us to make a Vite app. What do we have to do? Oh, that's easy. Just that right there. So take npm, not npx, npm, create Vite at latest. So a slightly different syntax. Let's give it a try. Okay. That was pretty fast. It says, what do I want to call my project? I want to call it my new dash project. It's a good name as any. Well, what do you want? Do you want a vanilla JS app, a Vue app? I would like a React app, please. Hit enter. Oh, I'm going to pick JavaScript. Why not? Hold on. Is it done? I just hit enter. Let's take a look. There it is. That was like a millisecond. It created my React app in much less than a second. How long does CRA take? It takes a while, doesn't it? It kind of grinds away for a while. And can I run this thing? Let's take a look. Let's open my project. Let's take a look. What do I get? Yeah, it's all there. It has a slightly different structure. It's got public, but public has nothing, just some test files. Everything's in source. It puts index.html outside here. What's that look like? Well, that kind of looks familiar, doesn't it? I've got my div id equals root. It's a kind of a smaller index. I kind of like that. It's not as much stuff as before, but that's our old friend id equals root. We remember that one, don't we? So that's not that much different. And it's got source. It's got our app. Notice they're all called .jsx. That's one of the things with Vite. It wants everything to be called JSX. I can live with that too. And there's my demo. It looks a lot like, well, what I'm used to. If I look at my main JSX, it finds my app. This is identical, by the way. This is identical to what I had in my CRA index.js. So it looks like they've renamed index.js main.jsx. So some minor subtle differences, not a big deal. And they all have to be JSX. It's kind of the only gotcha. Apart from that, it works. Now, they kind of cheated because there's no null modules. It didn't install anything, did it? So maybe that's a little slower. Let's go ahead and try that. So npm install. We have to add all our modules. Let's compare this to how long it takes a CRA app to install. And they can take up to a minute sometimes, depending on the CRA app. Let's take a look. So this is usually around 8 seconds to install a Vite app. And yeah, it's about right. There we go. About 8-9 seconds. Pretty fast. Let's try and run our new Vite app. Now we know how to run a Create React app. We just go npm start. So npm start. Oh, I couldn't find a start. Well, let's go to package.json and find out. What does it have there? Start. Oh, dev. Okay, so it's npm run dev, not start. I can even put a start if I wanted to. Just put start there. It looks like they don't give you a start by default. They just say npm run dev. But I can add a start if I want. But I'll do the npm run dev. So npm run dev. Now we all know how long it takes a CRA app to start up. It takes, depending, it takes a couple seconds, right? Maybe even 10 seconds, depending on the machine. So hit enter and watch what happens. There it is. That was it. It was about a second, maybe a bit less than 1 second to start my app. And I get a menu. Let's press H. Cool. Press R to restart the server. Press U to show the URL. There's the URL. Press O to open in browser. Let's go up and press O. Press O. There we go. And there's my spinning atom. I get a counter. Look at that. That's so cool. They give me I love counters. They give me some example code. They give me some example of state in their demo app that they make. And of course, the first thing I do, of course, I go into here, into my app JSX, and I kind of delete everything, don't I? I just kind of clear all this stuff out. There, right about into my div, right? I'll do the whole thing there. And now it's empty. And of course, now I have an empty app. There, okay. Nope, there. And there we go. And there's my app. It's about the same, but it's way faster than create React apps. So I encourage you, go ahead and make yourself a Vite app. They're virtually identical in the way they look, slight differences. Public isn't even used anymore. I don't care about that much anymore. You can delete it. And index has been renamed to main. That's kind of it. Okay. Apart from that, it looks exactly the same as what you're used to seeing. And that's what I have in this little project here. Let's get out of here. Let's go cd ... and cd into my little final project. There it is. It is a Vite app, so cd into the client. There. And I have the server. So I have two little mini projects inside my main project. I have client and I have server. Okay. There's my client, typical React stuff, just Vite version. And I've got my server, which is Express, which I'm totally used to. So let's take a look at a couple things. Let's look at my client app, my Vite app. So go into client, source. Now I haven't done a lot with this. All I have here is just hello React world. It doesn't do really much of anything, okay? What I can do, let's switch branches, by the way. Quickly switch. There, I have a slightly enhanced version of this. There, okay. I've added a couple extra things in this version of my app. It's not much. I've simply called it my anything app, and I've got an input, and I can add to a list. That's all it does. It shows, I think it shows a current version. And I've got some use data, which is like use application data hook. Okay. Now, the actual workings of this app is not so important. Okay. We're going to talk about how to deploy this app to a cloud, but let's talk about how it works quickly. Okay. So I've got this use data hook, and this is all my state stuff. Remember we talked about having our state all together? Well, this is my use application data hook. There's my state, and there's all the functions that do stuff with state. Got a couple of use effects. It looks like they load. I've got an add item, delete item, and I've got return stuff from my hook. So this is all of my state and some interface functions. Really, add and delete is all I have that I'm exposing, and I'm also exposing my my data itself. Okay, and in case there's an error, I also expose an error on my catch. So I've made a state for that, and I expose that. So pretty straightforward. So when my app starts, it's going to, looks like it's going to look for these endpoints. Okay, so that's enough for the client. It's going to that, and it's going to render stuff on my on my screen. It's going to say anything app, maybe show some status and show a list. Now my next app is my server app. This is my Express server app right here. Server.js. It just does some dummy stuff. It has some dummy data, and it does a get status, returns 1.03 as the current version. That's it. This is all hard coded. So app.get API data. And that. You got a post. It does a push inside its little array. Data.push, and it returns your item. So if I can save an item and I can delete an item. And that's kind of the whole app. So I've got an Express app that exposes 1, 2, 3, 4 endpoints. Okay. That's all it does. And if I run this one, let's go to my server, npm install. This is now, of course, an Express app, npm start. There, on port 80. And let's test, see if this thing works. Let's go to my browser, because we always test endpoints using a different piece of software. We don't use our React app to test our Express app, do we? I'm going to use Rested. Has anybody used Rested before? It is a great little app. It's actually an extension for Chrome and Firefox called Rested. It is super cool and way less of a headache than something like Postman. Postman, I hate using it because it's huge, it's clunky, it's hard to use. Whereas this, it's built into your browser. It's right there. Extension puts the little pointy bracket thing, and you can do a get. So let's do a get on. We're running on 8080, so localhost 8080. So http p:// API data. Looks like I've done this before. Localhost API/data. And what do I get? I get my data. There's my Express app serving out my data, which makes totally no surprise, because it's simply dumping out that data. That's all this thing does. It simply sends data. So I expect to get the very same thing, and I did. Okay, I can do a post as well. I could do a post. Do I got a post there? I do, and I've got a delete as well. And I have a delete, and I could call these as well. I've also got a status. Let's look at this one, API/status. I should see version 1.03. So status, send request. Oh, I'm just thinking, make sure I click on my app. API data. Oh, type custom. Oh, it's a delete. Oh, delete. Hold on, it's a get. That's why. Status. There we go. Okay, thank you. Yes, okay. Wonder what's going on. Yeah. Which is totally no surprise, because that's exactly what I do. Now, when you're making your endpoints, if you're a person tasked with making endpoints, this is what you should do. Pump out dummy data right away. Don't wait until you have a working database. That takes a lot of time and effort. Just spit out some data. Make yourself some data that you expect to spit out and dump it out. There, it works. This takes 5 minutes to make an array and res.json it. Less than 5 minutes. Then you have time to work on database stuff, get it all working. But now the person doing the React development has a working API that will allow them to get right to work really fast. Need a new endpoint? I can make one for you. Sure, make a new one. There, it's more dummy data. And you give them whatever object you think they'd want hard-coded. This is called fixture data, or a mock service, if you will. It's a mock web service that spits out stuff there with no database. And now at my leisure, I can go and start hooking up my PG stuff and all the fun stuff. Okay, so there's my two apps. And together, they should work. Let's take a look. So now my React app, which is there. Let's go to my React app here. Okay. And npm start. Do I have a start in it? I must have one. Okay. Let's open that in the browser. So H, it says press O to open in browser, press O, and it's going to probably make some API calls, and it does. It looks like it grabs my API/version or status call, and looking at my client code in my hook, it does. It goes to API status. It calls that. That looks like it also calls data and gets some data. So now I have some friends: Nathan Brown, James Holden, Roy Treneman, Maurice Moss, and that guy. Okay. Anyone know these names? Who knows Nathan Brown? Any Upload fans in the crowd? Really? Awesome show. Great. How about James Holden? Gotta know James Holden, right? Come on, The Expanse. Yes. Okay. Oop, looks like I killed James. And of course, we have Maurice and we have Tom. Right. Of course, this is from the IT crowd. We all know IT crowd, right? Totally. I think the IT crowd is required watching to be in this business. To be a nerd, you have to have watched the IT crowd. It's pretty funny. Oh, British show. Okay. And if I click one, it deletes it. And Tom, oh, they're all gone. Better restart my app. Here's my server because now it's there. Start it again. And how's my database doing? Refresh. And I'm back. Okay. And Roy. Okay. That's my app. It's a very simple app, and I can add things to my app. I can say, add new friend, Freddie Mercury. I guess I'm from that generation. Been coding way too long. I've been coding since before there were Macs and PCs. Oh, I can add Freddie. Okay. So this is my app. It's like an anything list app that does an API version just for fun. So it works. So what was the sequence of events I had to build and deploy this thing? Let's stop both these things. Let's try that. So what did I do? So let's clear that. So the sequence was this. I first went CD into my server, didn't I? There. Then I typed npm install. Okay, now it's installed. That's at npm start. So that was my sequence I need for my Express app. What about my React app? That's a bit different. How do I get this one going? So, well, it's npm install. That much is the same. And installs the React packages. Then I'm going to go npm. But since this is a React app, I can't just go start because I can't deploy with Webpack and Babel. Doesn't work. Instead, you probably heard about this before. It's called the build. Anyone heard about the build? I think in one of the very first React lectures, we talked about this, and we need to build a React app. It takes all of our JSX and converts it into what? What does JSX end up as ultimately? Or what can browsers read? There's only 3 things that a browser can read. One of them is HTML. Yes, a browser can read HTML. What else can a browser read? 2 more things it can. JavaScript, exactly. A browser can certainly understand JavaScript. And the third thing is CSS, exactly. A browser can only understand HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Nothing else. It can't understand this. This is JSX. The browser will crash. We cannot use this directly. We have to convert this to HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And that's what the build does. And CRA, or Create React App, has also a builder that builds the same thing. So let's go ahead and run our build. So there is in package.json a build target. That means we can go npm run build. Let's see what we get. npm run build. There. I was pretty fast. And look at that. It made a directory called dist, stands for distribution. And what does it contain? Contains, well, 3 things. HTML, JS, and CSS. 3 files all smushed together and optimized and sliced and diced to be nice and efficient. There we go. Index. Well, that's pretty small. Like that's kind of the same thing. That didn't change much. Okay. Okay, so that's not bad. But you notice it's calling my JS and my CSS, just like a regular page would. Remember back in jQuery with Tweeter, same thing. It's calling my JS and my CSS. Let's open our JS. Let's take a look. Wow. Okay, I can sure read this easy. Not. Okay. What's this? Secret internals. Do not use or you will be fired. I like this. This is awesome. Wow. Okay. This must be from Facebook. Okay. Any more of those? I like that. Any more fired? Let's look for the word fired. I like that. It's cool. Fired. The results. Oh, oh, another one. There's 4 of them. Secret internals do not use, you'll be fired. This sounds like Facebook code, I think, right? I'm guessing it's Facebook code. Anyway, so, but clearly what happens is when you do a build, it creates these highly optimized files for you of CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, which we can then serve out to a browser. But the problem is we haven't got a server anymore. There's no more server. This is just a bunch of files. I need a server to serve my files. No more Webpack. That's gone, right? This dist only contains static code. Anybody tried the stretch of deploying our code to, I think it was Netlify? There was one of the exercises in Compass where we deploy our code to some static server. Well, that's what we do. We need maybe Apache. That's a great server. I think there's one, if I'm not mistaken, it's called, take a look, cd dist, and if I'm not mistaken, I can go npx, is it HTTP server? I think it's called HTTP server. It's a very small little server, npx. Let's try that. I could be wrong. Oh, looks like it worked. Okay. And it's serving out my file, I guess. Let's try it. It's on port 8081. I have no idea. Let's try it. Now, my Express isn't working, so it's going to fail. But let's see if it even runs my app. Let's go localhost 8. Hold on, it was 8081. 8081. Oh, that's my app. Cool. Now, the API is not working. That's another story. But it is certainly serving out my React app. Okay, very cool. It's a very small little module. So that'll work. Okay, so I could use a third-party server to serve out my HTML, JS, and CSS. That works. And any other server will do, honestly. It doesn't matter what you use. Nginx is a very useful, popular one. So is Apache. This one's cheap and easy, so that works too. But here's my problem. I want to deploy this as a unit all together, not as 2 separate things. I want them all to stay together because you can tell this React app depends on my Express app. It means I need to have one somewhere and the other someplace else. That's inefficient. I want them all to be together all the time. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a server that could serve out my React app and my Express app for me? I just need a server. If only I had a server. Maybe a server in my code here. Maybe it's called server. Oh, wait a second. I have a server. Server.js. It's called Express. I do have a server already. Server.js there's a server. It can serve out anything you want. It'll serve out endpoints like this, but it will also serve out static code. Take a look. Express will serve out static code. How does that work? Look at this. Serving static files in Express. This looks exciting. Totally haven't been here before. Well, that's easy. Just say app use Express static and give it a directory that you want to serve it out of. That's cool. So if I said app use Express static and then gave it some directory, it'll serve out those files, in this case, out of the public directory. So if I had a folder here called public, I said app service and I dump any files in there, they'd show up. Let's test that theory. Let's go ahead and make ourselves a public, call it public for now. Call it public. And we'll follow their advice. Public. There. Now let's put inside here just any random HTML. We'll call it index.html. And we'll just do some totally random. There. We'll do a div hello static code. There, the world's simplest web page. Okay. And let's go ahead and add this line to our Express app. Let's go to our server.js and we'll go ahead and do that. I've done this here. I'll just comment this one out for now. There, because I've done this already. There. Let's do this. Okay, app use, Express static, public. Okay. Let's go and start my Express app. Is it running? If not, I'll start and stop it. That's my one. Okay, stop that. npm start on port 8080. So by default, by the way, this means slash. But if you omit that, it defaults to slash, right? I usually include it to make it very clear that I want to just install or serve slash. Okay, doesn't really matter. Okay, let's go to 8080 slash and see what we get. Now make sure you don't override slash here, okay? Because if I do apt-get slash, it's going to override this slash. I don't want that. Only got you. Just make sure you don't override it someplace. But let's go to our code here. We'll go to 8080 slash. Oh, hello static code. There. My Express app is now serving out static code. Oh, wait a second. I have some other static code I would really like to serve out. I've got my entire React dist I'd like to serve. Wouldn't it be great if I simply take all my code here and put that in my public? Let's take out this one here and put all my dist code inside there, like that. Let's grab that. Can I copy and paste? There. Okay, so now my public contains this, but now it contains my React app instead. Let's go to 8080, and what do we get? It's working, and the API is working. The whole thing's working. Look at this. All as one. This is very cool, okay? So this is how we can leverage this to deploy our app. Okay, so now we know if I can somehow, as part of my build process, get these files into some folder that my server knows about, I can do an app use static and access it. So I'm going to do something different. So let's just take this one out of here. That one for now. Okay. So we're kind of pulling together here, kind of planning what we're doing. So what I want to do, what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to put my public right here. Public. I want it right here. So it doesn't adulterate my code from my Express. That's what I want, right? I want this to be here outside of both of them. So what I did instead was I told my Express to use ... public. So I just go to ... / public. So it'll go up one and now here. And now my dist code can be in here instead, like that. And there. And now they're kind of three separate things. This way I haven't corrupted my server code by adding some exterior code. but I told my Express app to look up one and then look for a folder called public just above it, ... and then public. So ... public is right there. Okay, let's stop and start our app and see if that works. We're getting closer. npm start. Well, didn't crash on me. Let's run this again. See what happens. It's working again. This is great. So now I know what I want to accomplish. What I want to accomplish is when I build both of these, I want to end up with this installed, my React app built, and the files moved into a folder called public. Let's see how we can do that all in one step. Okay. This is going to be a one-step build. Now you may have noticed, eagle-eyed viewers will notice I've got a package.json sitting here on the outside. What's with that? What does that do? Let's take a look. It's got a bunch of scripts. And what does it do? Well, install server, cd server, npm install, cd client, npm install, cd client, npm run build. Look, it's stepping through all the steps I wanted. Deploy the client, make dir public, and move the files into public. Okay. So, and then I've got one big install that says npm install the server and install the client, and a build that does all the installs. They're kind of building on each other now. These are more complex. This one calls these two. This one calls this one, and it builds the client. And then it deploys the client, which copies the file. And this one starts everything. Let's watch this work. It's a one-step install and build, or one-step install. So if I go npm install here, it should run this install, which will go cd server, npm install. Then it'll run this install client, which will go cd client, npm install the client. And then the build is going to run build client and run deploy. So let's go clean things out. We'll clean up our assets. So we'll delete our directory right there. No public. It's gone. Okay. Everything's nice and clean now. Let's give this a try. Stop this. cd ... Okay. Fingers crossed. I never know if this is going to work. Or seriously, I never can tell if this is going to work. Okay. So 2 steps. I want to build and then start. Those are the 2 operations I want to take place. Build and start. So npm, and it was run build. Run build. Enter. Okay. Okay, it's going to my stuff. There we go. Into npm, the client, the server, and it's doing a build. Okay. It made a public directory. So that completed. So now all I have now is my npm start, which starts the server, which of course serves at everything. So npm start. Hit enter. And there it's running. So 2 commands, npm build, npm start. Let's go to my app. Surprised this is working. And do I in fact get an app? I do, and it's running. All in 2 steps. So this means now I can take my code and publish this to a service, such as, I've got one here, I used render. Okay, this is pretty good. I've tried all of them. Fly.io, also another good one. I kind of like render. It's kind of Heroku-esque in its way it's built. Salesforce bought out Heroku. Of course, they charge money now. So this one's not bad. Okay, can sign in. I use GitHub to sign in, and I can deploy an app. There. So static site. Well, I want to install a Node application. So it turns out it's called a web service. I don't know why they call it that. So this will be static HTML. This will be, I want to install a Node app. Just click on one of those. There we go. It explains what they are. the Node app. So I'll say, let's create a new web service. Okay. Now it's asking you, would you like to deploy from your GitHub? Yes, I would. Normally you hook up your server to your GitHub. So yes, I'll say GitHub, say next. Now I have already connected my GitHub to this project. And I can go configure, and I can tell my GitHub what I'd like this thing to see. Oh, hold on. Let me get my authentication app. It's being very secure today. So there. And GitHub. Okay. So 7 is my secret password, 749681. It'll be gone in a couple seconds. Okay. So it says I want this one, my render, to be able to access just that project. You can specify what projects you want these things to see. Obviously, I don't want to share my entire GitHub with some third party. That would be very good. So I've told GitHub only share that project, which is this one here, with render. So good. I'll go back to render, and it's being shared. Okay. All right. And I haven't pushed yet, but it still works. So I'll say, let's go ahead and use this. Let's connect this repository to our new web service. So we'll say connect. Okay, connect. Great. What should we call this thing? I don't know. We'll call it my final. I like a better name. Where well, it looks like Oregon is the closest thing. I'm not, well, Ohio, Oregon. More central, but I'm gonna go Oregon because I'm west, so I'm gonna pick Oregon. What branch would you like it to build? I can say the master branch. So yeah, let's build the master branch. The root directory. Okay, well, this is optional, just slash. So start building from slash of my GitHub project. And that works because my project is right here. Okay. And runtime is going to be node. Yes, it's node. And the build command. What command would you like it to run to build? Well, that was npm run build. And what command to start this? Okay, now just npm start or npm run or node server.js also works because that's all my start does, right? Take a look at my start here, and it cds into the server and npm start there. So I'm going to go npm start. There we go. And I think that's, yes, I want the free version. Thank you. Okay, and that's it. So it's pretty simple. You connect it to a repository, give it a name, and then what branch you'd like it to build. Master is fine for now. We could give it something else. And let's go ahead and try. Create web service. I'm always hesitant. This works. I never know. Okay, so it's doing some stuff. It says building. It gives us logs. Let's take a look. Oh, look at this. There's my npm install. That's the same stuff I saw. So it's running my package.json. Very cool. This is exciting. Okay, what's it doing now? I guess finish the install. I'm getting the free version. I'm not exactly getting the fastest version, right? So it may take a couple seconds. Uploading build. This is cool. It looks like it built. Oh, there it's copying my stuff. mkdir, that's out of my package.json. That looks familiar. Deploying. Very cool. What's going to happen? I'm not paying money for this, so I'm gonna wait instead. And eventually it will say my application is ready. Oh, there we go. CD server, npm start. Look at that. Server started on some port. Just get assigned a port. Okay. Your server is live. My server is live. It's alive. Like Frankenstein, right? It's alive. Was it Frankenstein? I think it was. Okay. And it gave me a URL, myfinal.onrender.com. Let's go there. I'm going to go click on that. There's my app. Woohoo! My app's there. Let's try that. Someone else try and go there. Do you guys see that? Try and go to https myfinalonrender.com. Let me just copy that link and I'll post that in the chat right here. Come on, chat. Okay. Can anyone else see my app? Is it in fact on the internet? Is it live? Yes, look at that. It's working. It's alive. Oh, look. Oh, delete. Who's deleting all my stuff? Take a look. People always delete my stuff from my app. Refresh my app. Okay, there we go. So it works. Now, that's not the best part, by the way. This is pretty cool. Let's look at the best part of this. Let's say I want to make a change to my app. Any changes I've made? What I make? I changed server.js. So I added some blank lines. That's nothing important, but sure. Okay, so I added a couple of blank lines or one blank line. Let's take a look. I added one blank line to my server.js. There we go. So why don't I go ahead and commit my change and push that change? What do you think's going to happen to my live app? You probably guessed already. I'm going to push the master branch. I've told my service to go to settings, master branch. Watch the master branch. If it changes, guess what's going to happen? Let's test that theory. Okay. Let's go here. And we're going to push a branch. I'll just say commit. I'll just say commit here. Stuff or added a line. There's my comment. Nice, meaningful comment. Commit that change. We're going to push our master branch. Just say sync. Push. Push master. Let's go to our render app and see if it notices. Oh, deploy started. Added a line. Look at this. It noticed I pushed something and it's building a new version of my app with my changes. Now, it's the same thing. It's only a blank line, but it's working. Where's my deploy? Let's take a look. There it is. And it's building another app for me, a new version of the app. Isn't this cool? This is what we call continuous integration or DevOps, where the developer does a push, just does a push, and it ends up live on a site someplace, probably a test site to begin with for testing purposes, but it's really useful. And this is extremely powerful. So now once it's set up, the developers can forget about it. Usually the senior developer will set all this up for you, get it all ready, and all we do as developers, we just push. Now, there are other steps, maybe a test. I didn't include that as a step in here. Probably I'd want to do a test as well. Maybe a install, then a build, then a test, and then a deploy and a push and a start. But build successful. Is it live? Oh, getting close. Let's take a look. Detecting service, it's getting pretty close. Anyway, so that's how it works. And I will release the code to this. This is very useful. If you look, the secret is a bunch of clever package.js scripts. So npm build, npm start. I'll post this code in Discord. You can take a look. And if you want to use this for your projects, feel free. Render is not a bad platform for serving stuff out. I find it pretty useful. Is it live? I'm still thinking. I didn't pay money for this, so it may take an extra long time. That is our talk for today. Okay, on our 2 advanced topics, we talked about context API and some cool stuff about DevOps and how to combine an Express and a React app together into one unit and deploy to some service. Very fun stuff. Have a happy Halloween, everyone, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Have a great evening. All right. Bye, guys.